Have you ever seen someone smile in a room full of people, yet you could tell something inside them was breaking? Sometimes behind that quiet smile, there's a war no one else can see. In this story, I'll share with you how one woman, Elena Vargas, 31 years old, went from the edge of ending her life to rediscovering meaning, connection, and peace. And I'll also advise you how to deal with someone who's going through something like this, because how you respond can make all the difference between despair and recovery. When I first met Elena, she didn't look like someone who wanted to die. She looked tired, a kind of tired that sleep doesn't fix. Her eyes had that hollow glaze I've learned to recognize, the one that comes when the mind no longer believes tomorrow will be different. She spoke softly, as if afraid her words would disturb the silence she carried inside her. She said, "Doctor, I don't want to die. I just don't want to live like this anymore." Those words, they're common among people struggling with suicidal thoughts. It's rarely about wanting death itself. It's about wanting the pain to stop. Elena was a graphic designer in Madrid, talented, well-liked, and from the outside, she seemed perfectly fine. But her inner world was collapsing. She told me that over the past year, her motivation had vanished. Things that once made her happy, painting, reading, even cooking her favorite pasta, now felt meaningless. Every day began with the same thought: why am I still here? Her family didn't understand. Her mother, trying to help, would say things like, "You just need to be grateful. There are people suffering more than you." Her friends joked, "You're being too dramatic. Everyone feels low sometimes." And her boyfriend, unable to face her darkness, quietly drifted away. So Elena began to believe that her pain was her fault, that she was too weak, too emotional, too broken to be loved. When she finally reached my clinic, she wasn't looking for therapy. She came because her younger sister had begged her to just try once more. I still remember that first session. She sat across from me, her hands trembling slightly, her voice breaking every few sentences. It wasn't what she said that struck me. It was what she didn't say. She kept apologizing for crying, apologizing for existing. In that moment, I knew she didn't need analysis. She needed permission. Permission to feel, to be seen, to not hide behind the perfect mask she'd worn for years. When someone is on the verge of losing hope, the most dangerous thing we can do is minimize their pain. Too often, people try to fix them with positivity. They say, "Don't think like that," or "It'll get better." But when a person is in deep despair, those words sound hollow, even cruel. So I didn't say, "You'll be fine." I said, "It must be exhausting to hold all this alone." That sentence changed something in her posture. She looked at me as if no one had ever acknowledged her suffering before. Because truthfully, most of her life had been about pretending. Pretending to be strong, pretending to be fine, pretending not to need anyone. Elena had grown up in a household where emotions were seen as weakness. Her father, a retired police officer, believed crying was a form of surrender. Her mother, loving but fearful, often repeated, "We must keep up appearances." So from a young age, Elena learned to smile when she was hurt and to suppress her sadness with achievement. She excelled in school, got awards, earned scholarships, but every success left her emptier. Because deep down, she wasn't chasing dreams. She was running from failure, from being seen as not enough. As she told me about her past, I noticed a pattern. Her pain wasn't sudden. It had been growing quietly, year after year, until one day she couldn't carry it anymore. That's how suicidal thoughts often begin, not with an event, but with accumulation. A slow erosion of meaning piece by piece, until the mind begins to believe that absence is easier than endurance. She said, "Doctor, I wake up every morning with this heavy feeling, like a stone sitting on my chest. I try to distract myself, go to work, talk to people, but it follows me everywhere. And at night, it gets louder." I asked her what she meant by louder. She said, "It's like a voice, not someone else's but mine. It tells me I'm useless, that everyone would be better off without me." When I hear this, I never argue with the voice. I've learned that if you try to silence it, it grows stronger. Instead, I asked, "What does that voice sound like? When did you first start hearing it?" She thought for a long time, then whispered, "It sounds like my father when he was disappointed in me." That's when the story began to unfold. Her depression wasn't born from nothing. It was an echo of unprocessed pain. Her mind had internalized years of self-criticism and turned it into a constant inner attack. Now, I want you, the listener, to remember this. People who think about ending their lives aren't weak. They're people who have carried too much for too long without support. What they need isn't judgment. It's connection. It's presence. Sometimes just sitting beside them in silence can be more healing than 1,000 words. In the second session, Elena admitted something she hadn't told anyone. A few weeks before coming to me, she had planned her suicide. She had written letters. She had even gone to the location, but something stopped her. A stray cat had approached her, meowing, rubbing against her leg, and she couldn't bring herself to leave it there. That small, random act of life interrupted her plan. She said, "That cat didn't save me. It just reminded me I wasn't invisible." That sentence stayed with me. Because in truth, many lives are saved not by big interventions, but by small human moments of connection. A smile, a text, a kind word. These things remind a person that they still exist in someone's world. From there, we began what I call slow restoration. My approach combined cognitive therapy, body awareness, and neurophysiological grounding, inspired by Dr. Nazareth Castellanos' research on the brain-body connection. We worked not only on her thoughts, but on her physical sensations. The way her body held trauma in her chest, her stomach, her breath when she described the heaviness. I guided her through slow breathing exercises to activate the vagus nerve, the pathway that helps calm the brain's fear response. Over time, she began to sense when her mind was spiraling and learned how to pause, to breathe, to name what she was feeling instead of fighting it. But recovery isn't linear. Some days she made progress. Other days she regressed. There were moments she said, "I feel guilty for feeling better," and that's something few people understand. Survivors of suicidal ideation often feel guilt for being alive when others aren't. So, we worked through that too, learning that healing doesn't erase pain, it transforms it into strength. 3 months into therapy, something remarkable happened. Elena came to my office holding a small notebook. She had started writing again, poems, thoughts, little fragments of meaning. She said, "I don't know if it's good, but it feels good to write." I told her, "You don't have to write something good. You just have to write something true." That moment marked her turning point. She began to re-engage with life, not because everything was fixed, but because she began to believe her emotions had value. That her pain wasn't a curse and it was communication. A signal from the body asking to be heard, but society wasn't as gentle. When she tried to talk about her depression with her coworkers, one of them laughed and said, "You? Depressed? You're too pretty for that." Another said, "You just need a vacation." That's when she realized that stigma can be more isolating than the illness itself. So many people who battle suicidal thoughts wear masks. They go to work, they joke, they perform. They don't fit the stereotype of someone sick, but inside they're breaking. And when the world dismisses them, their silence deepens. That's why if you're watching this, and you know someone who seems withdrawn, distant, or not themselves, please don't say, "Cheer up." Don't tell them to just think positive. Instead, try this. Say, "I'm here. You're not alone. Tell me what it feels like." Those words have the power to open a door. Sometimes that's all they need. One evening during a session, I asked Elena what hope looked like to her. She smiled faintly and said, "Hope looks like waking up without wishing I hadn't." It was raw, honest, and deeply human. Hope isn't always about bright futures or grand goals. Sometimes it's as small as surviving another day. We started reframing her relationship with pain, not as something to escape, but as something to understand. I told her, "Your pain is a map. If we follow it, it will lead us to the part of you that's asking to be healed." That's when she began exploring her past memories. Moments she'd buried, like when her father dismissed her dream of becoming an artist, or when a teacher mocked her for being too sensitive. She cried through those stories, but with every tear, she released a layer of guilt that wasn't hers to carry. As our sessions continued, something changed, not dramatically, but subtly, like a window being opened in a quiet room. Elena started noticing the small details she used to ignore. The smell of morning coffee, the sound of rain against her window, the laughter of a child walking past her building. These were ordinary things, yet for someone who had once planned her own death, they were signs of life returning. One afternoon during a session, she told me, "I don't feel better, but I don't feel hopeless either. It's like I'm standing between two worlds." I nodded. "That's healing," I said. "Not the disappearance of pain, but the rediscovery of meaning in spite of it." She looked puzzled. So I explained something I often tell my patients. And maybe it's something you, the listener, need to hear too. Depression isn't just sadness. It's disconnection. The disconnection between who we are and who we think we're supposed to be. Between our inner truth and the mask we wear for others. Elena had spent years pretending she was fine, but every act of pretending created a gap inside her. And that gap became the birthplace of despair. We began working on reconnecting her with herself, not through forced positivity, but through awareness, noticing what she felt, naming it, and allowing it without shame. During one exercise, I asked her to draw her emotions. She frowned, saying she wasn't good at art anymore. I reminded her that it wasn't about art. It was about truth. She hesitated, then began to draw. When she finished, she showed me a simple image, a dark blue figure sitting under a tree with a faint golden light above. She said softly, "This is me." And that light? I don't know what it is yet, but I think it's hope. That moment stayed with me. It reminded me that even in the darkest minds, the instinct to heal never disappears. It just hides beneath the weight of fear and guilt. But the path wasn't smooth. A few weeks later, Elena relapsed. She came to my office with red eyes and trembling hands. "I thought I was getting better," she said. "But last night I had those thoughts again. I almost did it." I could see the shame in her expression, the belief that she had failed therapy. So I said gently, "You didn't fail. Healing isn't a straight line. You're learning to live again, and that takes time." Then I asked her, "What stopped you this time?" She whispered, "I remembered your words and that my pain is communication." So instead of acting on it, I listened to it. That was her first moment of self-regulation, when the mind begins to observe itself rather than be consumed by its own storm. It was a quiet victory, invisible to the world, but monumental in her journey. In that session, we explored what had triggered the relapse. It was an argument with her mother, about something small, dinner plans, but it carried years of unspoken resentment. Her mother had told her, "You're always so sensitive. No wonder you get depressed." That sentence crushed her, because in it was the echo of everything she had been fighting against, the dismissal of her emotions. So I asked her, "What did you need to hear instead?" She paused for a long time and said, "I just needed her to say, 'I see you trying.'" That, I told her, is the essence of empathy. Not advice, not correction, just acknowledgement. And it's something all of us can give to someone who's struggling. If you ever know a person like Elena, someone fighting thoughts they can't control, remember this: they don't need to be convinced to live. They need to be reminded that their life still has meaning to someone. We began integrating somatic grounding, simple body-centered exercises designed to reconnect her mind to her body, a method rooted in Dr. Nazareth Castellanos' neuroscience research. Because trauma and depression often separate the two, the mind floats in despair while the body shuts down. So I guided her through slow breathing, sensory awareness, even gentle tapping to reawaken her nervous system. One day, she said something profound. "I think my body stopped trusting me." I ignored it for too long, and she was right. Healing required her to rebuild that trust, to prove day by day that she could care for herself again. To help her externalize her pain, I asked her to write a letter, not to anyone, but from her pain itself. She called it "The Voice That Wanted to End Me." In the letter, she wrote, "I'm not your enemy. I only appear when you stop listening. I scream because I need you to notice me. I want you to rest. I want you to stop pretending. I want you to love yourself before it's too late." When she finished reading, tears streamed down her face. That was the first time she realized her suicidal thoughts weren't evil. They were a desperate form of communication from the part of her that had been silenced too long. That moment changed everything. From then on, instead of trying to fight her dark thoughts, she began to dialogue with them. She would ask herself, "What are you trying to tell me?" That shift from resistance to compassion is where real transformation begins. After 4 months of therapy, her sister joined one of our sessions. She cried as she told Elena, "I never knew it was this bad. I thought you just wanted attention." Elena responded, "I didn't want attention. I wanted understanding. And that's when I spoke to them both about a truth many families need to hear. Attention-seeking behavior is still a form of seeking connection. When someone cries out, it isn't manipulation. It's survival. So if someone you love seems to overreact or dramatize, don't shame them. Ask them what pain lies beneath the surface. That session became a turning point in their relationship. Her sister started calling her daily, not to lecture or cheer her up, but just to ask, "How's your mind today?" And slowly, the wall between them began to crumble. One day, Elena came to therapy with something new, a spark. She said, "I've been volunteering at a community art center, teaching kids how to draw." Her eyes lit up as she described it. "It's strange," she said. "When they smile at their drawings, I feel alive, like I'm part of something again. That's what I call the return of meaning." It doesn't happen through willpower. It happens through connection. Through finding something bigger than your pain to live for. When we reach that stage, therapy becomes less about survival and more about growth. We began focusing on purpose, what kind of life she wanted to build now that she was staying. She said, "I want to help others who feel invisible. I know what it's like." That was when I realized she had crossed a threshold, from pain as identity to pain as empathy. One afternoon during a session, I told her something I often remind my patients. Your story isn't just something that happened to you. It's something you can use to heal others. Her response was quiet but powerful. Maybe that's why I survived. When I think about Elena Vargas, I remember the quiet strength in her eyes the day she said, "I think I want to live again." It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic. It was just a whisper. But it was the first whisper of life returning to her voice after months of darkness. That sentence became the seed of her recovery. Our sessions began to change from pure pain to exploration. She started asking questions that only appear when hope begins to peek through. Why do I feel calmer when I breathe this way? Or why do I start crying after meditation? Those questions meant she was no longer trying to escape herself. She was trying to understand herself. I explained to her how the brain, when trapped in constant emotional pain, loses its ability to perceive future reward. It's like the mind builds a fog so thick that even the smallest possibility of joy feels invisible. I told her, "We're not going to force you to be happy, Elena. We're just going to help your brain remember that light exists." So, I guided her through something called interoceptive awareness, a simple practice of noticing the sensations in her own body. When she placed a hand on her chest, she said she could feel her heart trembling, like it didn't trust that it was safe to beat freely. I asked her to breathe and imagine that each breath was a message to her body saying, "You can rest now. You're safe." It wasn't instant, but over weeks, her body began to trust her again. She started journaling at home, not about her sadness, but about every single moment that didn't hurt. I saw the sun today and didn't cry. I made coffee and it tasted normal. I spoke to my mother and didn't feel the urge to disappear. When she brought those notes to our session, I felt a quiet sense of pride. Not as a doctor, but as a witness. Because recovery isn't loud. It's gentle. It happens in whispers, in breaths, in ordinary mornings that don't break you anymore. Elena also started reconnecting with her family. She told them for the first time about the depth of her thoughts, not to shock them, but to show them how far she had come. Her mother cried. Her father didn't speak for a while and then simply said, "I didn't know how to help you." And that was a healing moment. Not because they suddenly became perfect, but because honesty replaced silence. During one of our later sessions, I shared with her something that neuroscience reminds us. The brain heals not just through medication or therapy, but through connection. When someone listens without judgment, your nervous system feels safe enough to repair itself. I told her, "You were never broken, Elena. You were just lonely in your pain. And now, you're not alone anymore." There was a day, I still remember it vividly, when she came in wearing a bright yellow scarf. She smiled and said, "It's my new color of hope." I smiled back, and for the first time, I saw her energy before her pain. She wasn't describing symptoms anymore. She was describing plans, things she wanted to try, people she wanted to see, even the small garden she wanted to start on her balcony. She said something that stayed with me. I used to think healing meant becoming who I was before. But now I realize it means becoming someone who can carry her scars with peace. I wrote that in my notes that night. Because it was true. Not just for her, but for so many who walk through the storm. Healing isn't erasing the past. It's learning how to walk forward with it without fear. Before our final session, she brought a letter. She wanted me to read it in front of her. It was written to the version of herself who wanted to die. It said, "You were tired, not weak. You were drowning, not ungrateful. And I forgive you for not knowing how to swim back then." I remember looking up from that letter, unable to speak for a few seconds. There are moments as a psychiatrist when the science, the techniques, the diagnostics, they all fade into the background. And what remains is pure humanity. That day, I felt it deeply. When she left my office, she turned at the door and said, "Thank you for seeing me before I could see myself." That was months ago. Today, when I think of Elena Vargas, I don't picture her tears or her silence. I picture her walking in sunlight, watering her plants, living an ordinary day that once felt impossible. And to those of you watching, if you ever encounter someone who seems trapped in their pain, please don't rush to fix them or label them. Sometimes the greatest act of help is quiet presence. Listen, sit with them. Let them know they're not strange for feeling lost. Because connection, not correction, is what brings the mind back to life. So if there's one thing I've learned from Elena's journey, it's this. The line between despair and hope can be very thin, but it exists. And sometimes all it takes is one gentle voice, one safe space, one human moment, to remind someone that tomorrow is still waiting for them. And as I close my diary tonight, I write her name one last time, Elena Vargas. A name that once echoed with pain, now breathes with life.